there, and welcome to Pan-African Television special coverage of the Global South Academic Forum 2025 edition that's happening here in Shanghai on the back of the 80th anniversary of the victory of the anti-fascist war. This is part of our coverage, and we are excited to have you as our audience watching us today. I sit here not alone. I have a special lineup of guests who are going to help us understand the issues or theme for which we are going to have this conversation, largely bothering around China-Africa relations and fostering South-South solidarity as well. My name is Makiza Micheline Latifa, and I am so excited to have you join us here on Pan-African Television. I will not bore you with so much talking. I'll head straight into introducing my guests who have joined me for this very important panel, for this very important discussion that we are going to have as well. I'd like to start off with none other but a face that you've seen most of the time on Pan-African Television. This will not be the first time I'm sitting with him. This will be probably the third time I'm sitting with Kambale, Musavuli, and I'm excited to be hosting you again, comrade. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
How are you feeling?
I'm looking forward to the conversation, especially the fact that we are here in China. I'm definitely looking forward to all the conversation we'll have here with all the comrades who are here.
And we're looking forward to the wealth of knowledge that you have to share with us as well. Kambale Musavuli is a political analyst and digital strategy advisor as well. And not only do we have Kambale, we've got two other guests that I'm going to introduce. I am so excited to have as part of this panel Professor Yinan Chen. She is a professor of mass communication and at the Shanghai Jiaotong University. I hope I got that correct.
Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you. It's nice to host you, actually. I'm excited about this, especially about the perspectives that you're going to share on the part of China. Okay. Absolutely. And also joining us for this very important discussion is none other but Jonis Ghedi Alasow. I hope the pronunciation is correct. He is the Executive Director of PanAfricanism Today Secretariat. And I am so happy that you're joining us, comrade.
Thank you very much. Hello to you and hello to all of our friends at Pan-African Television.
Definitely. Hello to you too. And we say thank you to all of you for allowing us to steal a little bit of your time on the sidelines of this important panel discussion that we've put together as part of our coverage of the Global South Academic Forum. Once again, you're welcome. My name is Makiza Micheline Latifa. Let's get right into the conversation. Let us start off on the tangent on the importance of, the forum for which we are gathered here in Shanghai. We all do know that it's been 80 years since the anti-fascist war, since the victory of the anti-fascist war. I'll start with you, Prof. What's the feeling like, especially being here for this very important forum?
And this year, as you mentioned, is the 18th anniversary of anti-fascist war. And for China, I think it's a 14-year war of resistance against the Japanese aggression. And African nations' struggles against Axis colonial invasion essentially was to oppose aggression and oppression and defend national survival rights. I think that's we share things in common. Right. So I think this year is a very special year.
Right, I'm excited about this conversation, really. But let me bring the conversation to you, Comrade Jonis. We hear a lot about the anti-fascist spirit. What do you think that represents for you, as an African? We know the struggles that we continue to engage in. We know the fights that is ahead. What does it mean to you in terms of reigniting the anti-fascist spirit?
Thank you very much. I think this is a very important question because I know we are celebrating a defeat of fascism 80 years ago today, but that does not mean that that defeat was permanent. The challenges that the fight that was being fought at the time is one that continues today. And what are we talking about? We are talking about a system that ends in crisis and then starts turning on not itself, but on the people. And this is what we saw in the rise of fascism. This kind of vicious, brutal way in which, in order to justify and continue the exploitation of people, it then becomes necessary to start literally waging war against them. And speaking from the African continent, this is not an experience that is unique to us. I mean, we speak about these two world wars. We talk about this evil that existed, but frankly, that's an evil, this history of colonialism that we've experienced for a very long time, where our resources, our people were the mechanisms via which our ancestors were enslaved, were colonized, neo-colonialism, etc. These were concerns for the populations, and a small group of people get rich, and people live in squalor and in drudgery, and that challenge continues. It's what we have in common. So many parts of the global south had to join forces to defeat fascism once, 80 years ago, and at times like today, it's very important for us to recognize that that fight continues, and we must join forces again to defeat these remnants of fascism that continue to exist.
Absolutely. I mean, you spoke succinctly about the fact that we're still faced with many challenges. The people of the world continue to suffer various forms of inequalities and so on and so forth. But let me now tilt the conversation against, what this legacy really means, Comrade Kambale, in terms of inspiring unity and cooperation amongst the rest of the world.
It is a present moment now for us to come together, and I'm going to look at what's happening on the African continent. Right in West Africa, we have nations who have decided, due to manifestation of imperialism from the context, that they must come together. Right? I'm speaking for Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. And they define imperialism today as the presence of foreign military bases in their countries, the control of the currency, the imposition of governments, not elected by people, by foreign powers, foreign interests. We're talking about France, we're talking about also the United States engagement in that area. So 80 years after the defeat of the fascists, as Jonis mentioned, we're still dealing with the same type of horrors across the continent. Some are coming together, as I mentioned, the AES. Others are still trying to figure out how global solidarity is going to come to stop the fascism of today. Right? So as we're taking inspiration from the past, we have to look at what's happening to our brothers and sisters in Sudan. Right? So the RSF massacring civilians, causing havoc, backed by UAE, armed by UAE, and when we're speaking about the United Arab Emirates, we also see again the United States military, taxpayers' money funding those governments. We move back in Central Africa, the DRC, millions have died. Continuous spill for resources. It's becoming even central in this whole discussion of the fourth industrial revolution, with resources needed for the global AI race.
Right.
So the commemoration, the look back to what happened before to take inspiration of today, is that we must have a call for unity similar to the spirit of Bandung, right? 70 years ago, actually, right? In 1955, countries from the global south decided to come together and say, how do we shape the global south agenda for the interest of the oppressed? And today, as we look back at the defeat of the fascists, we have to say, for the global south, what can we do to unite, to create that solidarity, not just in words, but also in deeds, to stop all these wars causing havoc, to stop the pilfering of our resources, to bring dignity and justice to our people. So that's what it means to me to think about what happened at the end of World War II, as today this issue is still very present in our lives.
Right. Let me stay a bit further on you, because you've touched on the many struggles that we continue to engage in, the many battles that we continue to engage in. But one of those will be the battle of ideas. Half of the times we don't really, talk about or tell the stories the way they should be told. There isn't enough stories out there about, some of these anti-imperialist struggles. The narrative out there is not so true, especially from Africa. What's your take on that?
Well, Africans are telling the stories, but they are not being heard. Right? And I spoke about the alliance of Sahel States, AES, is the French acronym, because it's an important moment to not just lift up the stories of the leaders of those countries. When we're talking about Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina, Chen in Niger, or Goita in Mali, but it's to really tell the story of what happened to the people of the Sahel for the past 2 to 3 decades. Right? Ordinary citizens of these regions, from all sectors of life, unions, from youth organizations, progressive imams, and so on and so forth, mobilized across the region for decades, educating the ordinary citizens about what was happening in the region. Why, after the fall and the killing, the brutal killing of the Libyan leader, Gaddafi, there was a proliferation of weapons in the region. There was a extreme attack on the control of the uranium and the gold of the region. They educated people that it does not make sense that we don't control our wealth. So from the 5-year-old to the 80-year-old, they all were clear on the manifestation of imperialism. So that's the story that's usually lost when we talk about AES, is the grassroots work of the organizers going from countries to countries, by bus, by roads, by any means necessary to educate the masses. Today, the population, the people of AES are very clear about what imperialism is. So if our call now, as we're thinking about the 80th anniversary of the defeat of the fascists, as we think about that, we have to say, how was it possible for AES to happen? It was the organizing force of the ordinary people of the region who did the work to mobilize the masses, to make sure that even if the leaders of AES are no longer, the people will be clear that they will always take a sovereign stand to control the lands, to control the resources for the benefit of the masses.
Absolutely. It's important that the resources of Africa is exploited for the benefit of the people of Africa. But before I come to you, Prof, let me go to you, Comrade Jonis, as well. You've definitely heard what Kambale has shared with us. What's your take as well on, the narrative out there? The stories are being told, but they're not being heard, just like Kambale says. What's your perspective?
No, I think I agree with his overall sentiments, but I think there's 2 points that are important to add, because one is we have to understand what we are up against. And what are you up against? You are up against a corporatized capitalist media whose job it is to try and convince people that the status quo is not just good, but it's the only possibility. This is what the media, the mainstream capitalist media does. And we have a challenge in many of our countries. Media is under-resourced, so what does the media do? They go to these established, they go to BBC, they go to Reuters, they go extract what's there. So the first point is that what you are up against, that the stories that are told, the analysis that is put on the table, the perspectives that you are getting, and this is not you and me, the average person is getting, about the world and even about their own countries, is twisted to serve an agenda. An agenda that tries to keep people from doing precisely what Kambale explained is happening in the AES, where people have taken the future into their own hands. So that's what you are up against. The second point is that there is an urgency for us to elevate, and elevate everywhere where we can, the experiences, but not just the experiences, also the aspirations of people. And this is, I think, the most important task, and this is why events like this are important, because they help us compare notes, they help us to sharpen our ability to do it, they help us to get confidence to go back home to our respective countries and our respective organizations and intensify these efforts. Because like he says, it's not that there aren't stories, it's that the stories that give the experience that people have. We see in the news that there are tariffs that are being introduced by the United States on the countries of the world. But what happens to a textile worker in Lesotho who's working in a factory when suddenly the factory is closed because the market is gone overnight like that? I was in Lesotho. Out of the 40,000 workers in that sector, 30,000 overnight lost their jobs. This is not a story that you tell. This is not a story that people know. What is the experience? But also, what is the aspirations of those people? They don't want to just say, we would like to not have tariffs and we want our jobs back. What those people are saying is that the reason for our existence must be so that we can have a better future for our children than what we have had ourselves. They have ideas about the kind of future that they are working towards. So that dichotomy, so in addition to what my comrade Kambale has said, we have to be clear about what we are dealing with. We are dealing with a corporatized capitalist media whose job it is to advance the interests and the agenda of imperialism. And number two, our job, if we are saying we want to change the world, is to win the hearts and minds of the people. And the best way to do that is by elevating the experiences and the aspirations of the people that are not just the victims of imperialism, but that are at the forefront of how we are going to overcome it.
Absolutely, and this also speaks to the importance of resistance, because we continue to engage in many struggles. But let me bring you into the conversation, Prof. We know that China's history of resistance and its role in the Eastern Front of the anti-imperialist struggle, and these are themes that are very central to this year's edition of the Global South Academic Forum. I want to ask you, though, how does China see its historical experience, as a moral and also as an intellectual foundation for South-South solidarity? One of the reasons why we are having this conversation is to also look at ways in which we can, sort of develop or improve upon our South-South collaborations, cooperation in terms of education, infrastructure, and so on.
And I think the cooperation between the global South countries is very important, because we can look back like 80 years ago when the imperialism was, in why they choose China, why they thought China was important. I think that was the same as in Africa, because there are three main factors. One is the resources here in China, and second is the huge market in China, and the third is the very important geography for China. So it's important for Asia. I think that's why they choose imperialism, choose Africa like 80 years ago.
Right.
But now what we face is we called neo-colonialism. I think the three factors we face right now is almost the same like 80 years ago. So within this global development imbalances and hegemonic interference today, so what we want to do is, as we said, is to our voices to be heard by the rest of the world. But the situation, the fact is, the most media, the influential media was dominated by the Western media. So the problem is how we find a way to speak out, to let our voices to be heard by the world. That's very important.
Right. Comrade Kambale, when you look at, we use the term South-South cooperation a lot, but for you, what does actual South-South cooperation and unity look like today in 2025? What do you think that should look like?
I think even when we use the word cooperation, from our vantage point, we mean collaboration. For the African continent at this critical moment, we want to move toward the digital space. As I've been visiting China and seeing the advance that has happened in the technological space, what does Africa need in terms of the cooperation with China and how advanced they are in the society? It will be collaboration. What do I mean by that? China has technology that Africa doesn't have, and Africa has the resources that China needs. And a cooperation and collaboration will mean technology transfer, co-production, co-creation, where we are learning, we are bettering our processes to become self-sufficient, to become sovereign, but we have to work together. And this is something we've done with China. Right? We've done with China when we look at the Belt and Road initiatives, how it's been implemented. And there are things that can be improved in the Belt and Road initiative as we think now for the future of what are the lessons learned in the implementation of the Belt and Road initiative and how we move forward. So my talk around cooperation has always been, it's not cooperation, it's actually collaboration. That we have to work hand in hand. And following even Xi's speech, when he spoke about a shared future, if the leader of China is able to see that with all the advance that China has made for its people, is still a country on planet Earth, right? In a global community, that China has a responsibility to work with the world to improve the quality of life of humans, of humanity. Thinking about how China was able to lift millions, right? Close to 100 million people out of poverty in a very short time. That's something that Africa has to study, right? Because we are dealing with an issue of poverty, right? What did China do in agriculture to have a food sovereignty? So all these lessons learned now have to be taken in our context on the African continent. But the key is, yes, I understand we say cooperation, but Africa needs collaboration, and we can learn from the Belt and Road Initiative and improve it for the future for us to work together for the betterment of the African people and for humanity.
Absolutely. Comrade Jonis, what would that collaboration, if I should call it that, look like for you? I was really impressed when I came here to Shanghai. I said, oh, wow, there's a lot of development here. What should an actual collaboration between, let me say, China and the rest of maybe the global south, maybe Africa, look like in real terms?
So
there's already a lot happening already that we'll definitely probably go into, but what would that look like for you?
So I want to start with what would it take on the African side for us to take advantage of that? Because of course we can make a list of here are all the things that we want to collaborate on. But at the end of the day, the objective of this is not to collaborate for collaboration's sake. The point is to create the conditions that will improve the lives of people. The example that was just given here of saying that people were lifted out of poverty. I mean, we come from there's many differences between Africa and China, but what we have in common is this history of colonialism, of exploitation, etc. But also a future which we want to, where we have a similar goal in our minds. We want to bring prosperity and dignity to our people. And whatever we do, somewhere along the line, we need to be able to say that, right, we come from this history of colonial and neo-colonial conditions. We were able to overcome it, and we have now been able to improve the lives of our people. This is the first point that I want to make. And I want to go back a little bit in history, because we are marking 80 years now of the world saying that here's the line and we refuse to accept fascism. But another thing happened 80 years ago. A few months after the Second World War was won, or the anti-fascist war was won, a group of people gathered in Manchester for a Pan-African conference in October 1945. So it's also 80 years since that Pan-African conference, which we are commemorating. And why am I starting with a conference? You see, because when we talk about China-Africa relations, we're talking about a country and a continent. Africa has more than 50 countries. It's multiple languages, it is multiple borders, and it's not obvious that what Zimbabwe is trying to do is the same as what the Congo is trying to do, is the same as what Egypt is trying to do. So, and the speech that Kambale referenced, which I find really interesting, where the Chinese president paints a picture of what kind of future do we envisage, which includes the Chinese people and the African people. He spoke of the 2.4 billion people. He didn't single out this or that African country, because at the end of the day, Africa needs to do a few things. One is to go back to that 80-year-old resolution that says we want Pan-African unity. We want to recognize that we can either stand separately or we can come together and we can become a serious force. So number one is we need to not just have cooperation between China and individual African countries, but we need an African agenda for the African people, which is about African unity. This is the first point. The second point is, which I think is significant, because again, in that same period, not long after the Second World War, there were a lot of things that happened, including national liberation struggles in Africa, but a revolution in China. A revolution that said that we are going to take political power and we're going to use it to benefit the people. The 800 million people that were lifted out of poverty, that's in some ways the consequence of a revolution. this need to say that we want political leadership, not in individual African countries, but in Africa, which is concerned with a revolution. And I mean revolution here very simply about having political power that serves the people. And this is not necessarily what exists everywhere in Africa. So the point about African unity and the point about the need for there to be a common political project which at the center is about advancing the aspirations and the dignity of the people, that's what we need to do. So I absolutely have a lot of hope and optimism for the possibilities of collaboration, of cooperation. But to me, the question is who at the end of the goal, of the end of the day is going to be the beneficiary of that. And it is our job in Africa to make sure that we learn from this experience of the last century of national liberation struggles, of revolutions, of lifting people out of poverty, and doing that against the backdrop of fascism that has not yet been defeated. There's still fascism, there's still imperialism, there's still capitalism.
It's reeling its head in different ways.
It keeps existing. So what do we learn from the last 100 years of the world's history in order to make sure that when we are cooperating, that collaboration, that cooperation, the relations that exist between us are about the consolidation not of countries or individuals or leaders, but of the 2.4 billion people that were mentioned in the speech by the Chinese president.
Absolutely. You touched also on, national liberation struggles. Kambale, let me take us back to, the Bandung and the non-aligned traditions. You mentioned the Bandung conference and even the Tricontinental conference as well. These all once provided us with a framework for solidarity across the entire continent. What lessons from those early movements can we apply, especially given today's geopolitical order or the world's global order today?
I mean, there are many lessons, but I think the most important lesson for me is that there was clarity on who the enemy is. And because there was clarity with who the enemy is and how the enemy operates, there was a strategy laid out for solidarity across the world, understanding the struggle that's happening in all the corners. The other one when I even look at Bandung, or even all the conferences that took place on the African continent, moving to 1958 in Ghana, the All African People's Conference, is the need to have a priority on what are the challenges of that time. So if they could define what the challenge was, and going back to 1945, one of the Manchester Conference, one of the immediate tasks was to make sure that the national liberation movement, the strategy of making sure that independence now was the rally cry of the movement, that we must support organization, people who are fighting to defeat colonialism, to make sure that Africans who fought out during World War II could come back in their own country, but still controlled by Western nations. Right, was the immediate. So now moving it forward to now, as we learn from the lesson, what will be our common strategy of understanding the current moment, right? We have few challenges taking place, but it's all the same. Now, Africa is crying for a second independence movement, and a second independence movement from my vantage point is an economic independence that's rooted in sovereignty of nations. That we have a nominal political independence, yet we still don't have a say in how our mineral resources are used.
Exploited.
And I've been spending the past few hours here studying the agreement that Malaysia has signed with the United States, pretty much losing sovereignty over the say of what's happening in the country. Similar agreements are taking place, right? Where countries, I'll use the DRC as an example, is signing a so-called peace deal with Rwanda and the United States, right? Where the US is going to get access not to $1 billion, not to $9 billion, but to $3 trillion worth of mineral resources in exchange for peace, right? So when you hear that, you say, Does the United States control Congo's wealth when there are 120 million people living on the land? Right? So if we are able to define a clear strategy of what is our current task in 2025, 80 years after the defeat of the fascists, having that common Pan-African strategy, that will help a lot. And we have a guiding light. I will continue to talk about AES, right? That they understood that they needed to do everything in their power to regain control of the bauxite, their gold, their uranium, to be able to develop their countries. Are we doing the same all across the African continent? Are we all going to rally around that cry and saying that we, at this current moment, that's the strategy? And if we use the same that strategy, a sovereign stand on control of our wealth and resources for now, making sure to let the people of the continent that this is our second wave of our independence, that will go a long way in connecting with those who are fighting in Tanzania after the debacle of the election, connecting with the young people in Kenya who have been fighting all these measures imposed on them by the IMF and World Bank, connecting with those even in Morocco lately, protesting. So there are so many movements from, even though we're talking about Africa, I could say from Nepal to Madagascar, all the way to our West Africa, that people want to have a say in decision-making process, but they have to remember that we have lost sovereignty of our land and resources, and we can use that to galvanize people as well. We think about the strategy of today.
Absolutely. That talk takes me right into my next question to you, Prof. I want to ask you, though, how does China's approach to cooperation differ from the traditional Western models of development assistance? Maybe you can shed more light on that, given your perspective as a professor who has done a lot of research in this lines as well.
And I think one of the most important things is that I read a lot from Western media. They criticize that China give financial aid to Africa, but the truth is it's not true, because it's a equal mutual benefit, mutually beneficial, because like Chinese government will help for the infrastructure, and also we have the, as you said, we have the advanced technology. But I used to this year, I actually filmed a story for a documentary. It's about in Xinjiang, we have a Chinese science academy, the Xinjiang Institute. They have the very advanced technology of desertification, how to delete desertification, and actually they collaborate that with the African scientists. And I asked them why we help African people for what. And they told me, we can get these, research data, and that will help our, research. So it's a mutual beneficial thing. And another thing is, I actually, like years before, I filmed a international class in Peking University. That class, they gathered together many, people from all walks of life from Africa. Maybe from government, from entrepreneur, and all walks of life. They gather together in Peking University and to learn from China, like how to, poverty elevation, and how to, the social, governance, and that not to, promote all what China do is right. That's not, but maybe there's some experience we can, share with the African people. So I think it's the mutual beneficial, and it's totally independent. So we will not, exchange with, other things with these, unequal,
There's
agreement.
no agenda to recolonize, as the Western world likes to term it. Comrade Jonis, what does that mutual respect look like in practice? She's spoken about, the series of development strategies there are, the series of developments that's happening, or cooperation that's happening already between China and Africa. What does that mutual respect look like? Because that's what we want, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
and I mean, I have to start by really questioning these Western sources that are concerned about Africa. I mean, these are the same
Since
people.
when have they ever been?
I mean,
The COVID
never
news.
mind the question of slavery and colonialism. There's no African slaves that went on ships to China. But ignore that. I have to ask, I mean, this is the same people who, through structural adjustment programs in the 1970s and 80s, completely gutted African governments, African economies, created the conditions where we couldn't invest in education, in healthcare, etc., because we had to sign these agreements as a result of the debt that we were forced into in the moment of decolonization. Then they created a bunch of NGOs funded by Western foundations to go and fill the gap that they created. So now you have NGOs then that are providing healthcare and education and so forth across the African continent. And then now they are withdrawing that, and suddenly there are people who are reliant on HIV/AIDS medication in parts of sub-Saharan Africa that cannot receive it because the state infrastructure was actively collapsed by structural adjustment. Then NGOs were introduced to fill the void, and now those NGOs are being collapsed, and again you have people that are really struggling with health. And those people directly responsible for the crisis I'm describing are on Africa's behalf worried about China. This is a question we have to ask. Which brings me to the main point. Look, it's Africa's problem to develop Africa. And African people are capable of doing that, having a vision of where do we want to go. So the second point I want to just make on this is that it's important to, when Africans are signing an agreement with China, it's our job to make sure, of course, that it's as good as possible, that as many people benefit. But I really think that the time of Big Brother and Western former colonizers on our behalf wanting to make sure that we are not exploited. Firstly, we are very worried that, I mean, they don't have a good history of not exploiting Africa. And secondly, it's our job to make sure these agreements are good. Which, let me get to the main point, which is that, what does that look like? And we've seen this already. I mean, and actually China is the best example of this. At the point of the revolution that I mentioned, it is one of the poorest countries in the world. Today, the reason why there's a need for all this propaganda and all of this concern about debt trapped and this and that from the West is because China is a force to be reckoned with,
Absolutely.
an economic force to be reckoned with. So they have gone as a country from being one of the poorest in the world to scaring the Western Empire purely by their existence. China doesn't threaten anyone, but purely because China exists, these countries that have benefited from 500 years of colonialism, of slavery, etc., are worried about China.
Suddenly they are uneasy.
And they're very worried, and they feel so worried that they patronizingly want to tell Africa to watch out for China. That's not really their job. It's our job to do that. But we have seen that what has China done in this really short period to develop as much as it did? It invested in infrastructure. Chinese-Africa collaboration takes the form of concrete material things. There are roads that when I drive to Zimbabwe, I drive on roads built by China. This Belt and Road Initiative, this investment into infrastructure, is making it rather than aid and handouts. China doesn't do aid and handouts in Africa. What it does is these kind of agreements that have a concrete material base, that even when the agreement is over, when whatever loans have been taken have been paid off, there's still a road for us to drive on. This NGOized aid of the West, which becomes a tool for manipulating a population, where one day you have healthcare and the next day you don't, is one of the ways in which Africa has, after all these years, not been able to really get out of the trap that it was in. So what does this look like? Look, there are many examples, but I think it's really important to do the kind of work that when the project is over, there's something left standing there. Maybe what we need is not support just for medicines. Maybe what we need is a hospital. And this is something that the China-Africa exchanges have understood. And we really don't, of course, we have to be careful that these investments that are being made ultimately benefit the people. But I don't think we need the policemen of the West in order to be able to do that. I think it's our job to do that. And then I think we want to see that both on the Chinese side and on the African side, there are really plans to have concrete material infrastructure development on the continent that will allow for the type of economic development of what we are seeing all over here. There's no reason why Africa cannot also do what China did, and who better to learn from than China?
Absolutely. Comrade Kambale, do you share a similar sentiment?
I do, but I wanted to bring us to a point that Jonis mentioned earlier, specifically around challenges in the cooperation, in the collaboration. And I think China is in a very difficult position collaborating with the African continent because there is an assumption that African countries have ended class struggle, right? So our leaders who come to the table at the negotiating table, though we may have standing projects, are still in many of our African countries people we are fighting. Right? So we still have class struggle on the African continent. So I keep throwing some anecdote. The example of the DRC president, Felix Tshisekedi. He was in Beijing maybe a couple of years ago. Yeah, a couple of years or last year. I think he also visited sometime this year. And there was a red carpet for him, met a lot of people here. He went to Turkey. He met with Erdogan. He went to Russia. He met with Putin. He went to the United States as well, right? That he has no allegiance to an ideology, right? He has an allegiance to a particular class in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That as we speak today, the news received yesterday is worrisome. The president of the Congo will be meeting the president of Israel in DRC, right? The president of Israel is going on a visit to DRC and Zambia at the moment. So while at the African Union, right, the African Union as a body is clear on the situation in Palestine, right? An African country, South Africa, took Israel to the International Criminal Court, where it was found that there is a genocide taking place in Palestine, and the DRC president is meeting with the president of Israel in DRC for his visit. So why am I presenting it this way? While we will have projects that will benefit the people, if African people are not able to deal with the class question and actually get to a point where, at least in China, right, there is discussion, proverbial statement, the class struggle is over, right? But we are still fighting that. We will still strengthen the elite who are causing desolation in our countries. So it's something to address, not by the Chinese, but by the African people. So it's to go back, as you pointed out earlier, about if Africans, after the defeat of the fascists, decided to go to Manchester to discuss the future of Africa and came up with a resolution and saying these are the priorities. What do we do today to go back to that priority so that as Africa is fighting to regain its dignity, to be a key player of the world, to change the conditions of the people, we address the class question. That will help not just in collaboration with China, but in collaboration with anyone around the world who wants to engage with the African continent.
Right. Let me come to you, Comrade Jonis, again before I go to Prof. In my preparation for this, I sort of put this very important question down, and I'd like to ask you, though, from a Pan-African perspective, how can movements and not intellectual communities, but let me say, how can movements like ours, like Pan-Africanism today, and so on, help shape state-level cooperation between Africa and China to keep it grounded in the people's needs, in the interest of the masses, rather than in elite interest? This is very important, and I would like to take your perspective on that. Probably we'll come back to you two for your input, and then I come to Prof.
A good and difficult question. Because I think, look, I suppose there's two levels to it. And the first one is that we have to recognize that, I mean, the world doesn't stop spinning waiting for us to resolve the contradictions of our societies. In other words, the moment that we are in a world where the kind of US-led empire has demonstrated to us that it is willing to take the entire ship down with it rather than lose hegemony. They're losing economic hegemony, they are reinvesting into military. I mean, even the Sahel example is really important, but the Sahel example unfolds against a backdrop of war that was artificially created by NATO and in North Africa. So on the one hand, you have this kind of the imperialism which is in crisis, which doesn't have the ability to maintain its hegemony. And what we discussed earlier, I mean, we know fascism doesn't emerge out of nowhere. Fascism emerges out of the crisis that is created inside capitalism.
The
in
failures
this
of capitalism.
It's a product of its own contradictions. And then it was interesting that there's a guy called Aimé Césaire, when he was discussing what was the Second World War, he described it as a boomerang. It was what Europe had thrown out into the colonies is now coming back to Europe itself. So what we saw in this the fascism of that period in Europe was actually the fascism of colonialism going back to Europe. But on the one hand, you are dealing with that resurgence. On the other hand, there are possibilities in the world. China has demonstrated an alternative path, different to the path that has been tread by these Western powers. It's not a question of do you like China or not. The point is there's an alternative option that is put onto the table by the Chinese experience. There are 5 or 6 other experiences that are a different path that have been taken. So the world is shifting, and in that context, those of us who are sitting on the African continent, who are saying that the ultimate people that we are interested in, our constituency, is the entire African population. We don't have one small little class that we want to benefit from these kind of agreements. Our job is to make sure that we understand what these agreements are, that we influence the way that they are shaped, that we make noise about them. Sometimes you find out that an agreement has been signed and 6 months ago. You only find out about it after it's already happened. So part of our job is in the current moment to make sure that whatever cooperation, collaboration agreements are being debated, not only with China, in general. If there's an agreement that is about to be signed between Tshisekedi and the president of Israel, it's important for the popular organizations, the people's organizations in the country, to put up their hand and ask what exactly is being signed here and how are we supposed to benefit from this kind of thing if the beneficiaries might be imperialist forces. So this is one task, but of course this is a short-term solution, because at the end of the day, the question of political power, the contradictions of our societies is what we have to address. And at the end of the day, it is our job to continue the struggle to make sure that by the time that a table is set and people are sitting around it making agreements, that the people in whose interests those agreements are being made are the people and not only the ones sitting at the table. That is ultimately the task, and like Kambale said, I think like we are all saying, is we have a lot to learn from China on what to do, what can be done. There are also lessons in China of what not to do. We must make new mistakes, not the same ones that have been made before. But that job of actually changing our own societies, creating the conditions where those who have the political power to make decisions are making decisions about a future for the people, not a future for themselves. That is our task, and that is the ultimate solution to the hard question you asked.
Absolutely. I mean, it's important that, most of these partnerships are to the benefit of the entirety, the masses, the entire population, not just a select few. Comrade Kambale.
Oh, you lost me on the question.
What will your take be?
Oh, what we might take, I wouldn't want to repeat what you said, because I'm in agreement with everything he said.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, it's important that we also speak about this very important conference that we are heading into. This will be the 3rd year of the Global South Academic Forum. You happen to have been here last year as a speaker on one of the key themes. What should we look forward to the most? We know that there are a lot of resolutions that comes out of conferences like this, but what should we look forward to in order to make sure that we are building a movement, a community that's geared towards solving the challenges of humanity?
Like last year, I attended this forum as the 2nd season of the forum. The section I took part in is how we have different mediums from the Global South countries. So mediums, we talk about how our voices can be heard by the world. Yeah, and I think the forum today is kind of like the Bandung conference, like in 1955. It's about how we collaborate together. We have mutual respect. We collaborate together and to go forward into a better future. The thing is that, like you said, I think it's about the sustainable agreement, not like and also the effectiveness of our agreement. China and Africa has a lot of agreement, and whatever like President Xi or the next president and the former president will combine to that agreement. But you can see the United States, so the agreement like years ago and today it's totally different. So how we can trust each other and keep that trust to go forward. And like as far as I know, like in China we have different provinces, and different provinces in charge of different countries in Africa. I know, and also Global South countries such as Caribbean Sea. So like I know in Guizhou, they aid Caribbean Sea area to have medical trip to that country, and also we have medical trips around different part of China and to different countries in Africa. So I think that sustainable collaboration and mutual benefit will be go forward.
Absolutely. I'm excited about the conference already, but Comrade Kambale, I mean, we're entering into the conference very soon, and just like I said, there's going to be a lot of discussions. You are even speaking on one of the panels on digital sovereignty and so on and so forth. What are you looking forward to? I mean, on the back of the on the back of the GSAF. I mean, what is that expectation that you have for this conference?
There are so many. I'll try to maybe spell out 2. One is really to learn about what is happening around the globe, right. Particularly in Global South countries. And it's important because in a few meetings we had earlier this year, I realized that the same strategy is being used all across the world, particularly as it relates to the panel I'm going to be on the question of digital sovereignty. And in my earlier submission, I spoke about the agreement that Malaysia has signed with the United States. Every single African country should read that because whatever was signed with Malaysia, Section 3 particularly, has made Malaysia pretty much, I could even argue, a colony of the United States. They have no say whatsoever about data in the countries, how it's managed, for whose benefit. Where the US is dictating access to servers, is dictating how even US corporations will engage, and telling Malaysia that Malaysia has no right to ask for the source code. They actually wrote in the agreement source code of American companies operating algorithms in the country. So when you see that and you say, well, if this is something that Trump is bringing to Malaysia, I am pretty sure that a similar agreement is being circulated in a few countries that will be negotiating some agreement with the United States. And Africans need to know that in 2025, the question of who controls your data for whose benefit is as important as who controls your natural resources and for whose benefit. Because data has value, and this value is extracted, right? The data is extracted from the continent, siphoned through cables, in the Western world, in the Western servers, monetized, and as it's monetized, there is no benefit from where the data was extracted. But as we talk about, the digital sovereignty and others, it sounds like, oh, these are tech discussions. But these are serious discussions if the United States government can put it in an agreement. They understand they need it. Right? So what I'm very interested in this Global South Academic Forum is to discuss with other scholars, other academics, what is happening in your country. What are agreements you're signing with Amazon, with Microsoft, with all these big tech? How is that? How does that impact your citizens? And then, of course, the other side is also for us to share our experience. How come in 2024 millions of Africans for at least 2 weeks could be taken off the internet because a subsea cable experienced seismic activities in the Atlantic Ocean, cutting the fiber optic cables, right?
Right.
For at least 2 weeks. Some were off the internet for a month. And there were no protests whatsoever. That shows how weak our digital space is, that we are so dependent on Western power. So that's on one side. The other thing that excites me about the conference, what I'm looking forward to, is how we could have a collective strategy for people's power as it relates to any sector of our engagement for sovereignty, be it digital, be it political, and so on. If I have to learn from Brazil, what are Brazilians doing? If I have to learn from South Africa, what is the outcome of the G20 summit? Like how to learn from one another, but also how to build a collective strategy for strengthening people's power, movement power, organization power for the future. So those are the things I'm definitely looking forward to. And last, what I'm looking forward to is an end to wars on the African continent. How we can lift up the challenges of the African people and make a priority. When I see what's happening in Sudan, it really hurts me. I know the Ghanaian president has sent support to Cuba, has sent support to Sudan, but we as African people have to really embrace Pan-Africanism. These national borders do not mean anything. A Sudanese is a Congolese is a Ghanaian. That they are attacking us, right? The forces of imperialism attacking us do not respect national boundaries. They don't operate also as nationalities, right? The corporations, they call them even multinationals, right? So they work beyond borders. So they are united in the oppression of the people of the world. So we on the African continent, we in the global south, have to have that revival of the Bandung spirit. Solidarity, not just in words, but in deeds, has to go to all the suffering of all oppressed, be it in Sudan, be it in Congo, be it in Palestine, that we create a collective strategy for the liberation of people of the world.
Absolutely. Your remarks just reminded me of one of Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah's quotes, where he said that the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it's linked to the total liberation of the African continent. So indeed, united we stand. It's only right that I bring you, the Executive Director of Pan-Africanism today, into the conversation yet again. What outcomes are you hoping that GSCF 2025 will deliver from where you sit?
Sure. So it's actually not all that dissimilar from what the rest of the panel has been saying. Because look, I mean, having seen some of the people who are going to be presenting, I mean, these are people that have spent a lot of time doing research, trying to understand different complicated questions, both challenges that are confronting the world, but also ideas and proposals for how do we overcome those challenges. So just the richness of the presentations and the contributions, usually you walk away from sessions like this with new energy and new confidence, but also new perspectives. Precisely. So that's the first thing. It's not completely different to what has already been said, but I think I'm confident that we are going to get a lot of new, interesting ideas, analyses, and also just information out of this meeting. The second point, which is a bit of a controversial point, but I always say this. You see, I'm often very cynical about conferences. Why? Because there is a tendency to come together, to put your life on hold, you come together for 2 days, and then you go back to your life and you just continue how things were, in which case the conference becomes a kind of little bubble that exists by itself. And for me, the evaluation or the test of a conference is not only in the conference itself, but in what happens afterwards. So if this is a 2-day meeting, I actually think the most important part of the conference is day 3. What do we do when we leave? Do we change how we approach things? Do we have new relations, new people that we can phone and ask a question to about a complex issue? Do we have new sources of information to help us build a picture about what is the world that we are confronting and how do we continue changing it for the better? So, to me, what I expect from the conference is, of course, vibrant, rich discussions and contributions. And secondly, what I expect from the conference is actually not the conference, it's what we do afterwards.
Absolutely. Any final words from you, Prof, before we wrap up?
I find that, nowadays we are facing the information warfare. It's a new kind of, warfare. So how, all of us, including China, African country, and South global country, we can win, in this warfare. It's the, it's what we will do after this, conference in the forum.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you all so very kindly. It's important that we have discussions like this to carry the story out there. This is part of Pan-African Television's special coverage of the 2025 Global South Academic Forum, and we are more than excited to have come your way with this very important edition of the show. Let me say thank you once again to my guest who had the wealth of knowledge to share with us today. Thank you, Jonis Ghedi Alasow. He is the Executive Director of the Pan-Africanism Today Secretariat, or Pan-Africanism Today in its entirety. I also want to say thank you to Kambale Musavuli, familiar face on Pan-African Television. He's a political analyst and digital strategy advisor as well. We say thank you to you for making time to join us. And I want to say special thank you to Professor Yinan Chen, Professor of Mass Media and Communication at the Shanghai Jiaotong University. Thank you so much. First time on Pan-African TV. We hope to host you a lot more than this.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you to all of you. My name is Makiza Micheline Latifa, and as I said earlier, this is part of our special coverage of GSAF 2025. We hope you had a good time watching us. Thank you.